The evening sky above Istanbul carried soft shades of orange and pink as the city slowly prepared for night. The streets near the Bosphorus were calm, touched by a cool breeze that moved gently between the old buildings and glowing cafe windows. People walked quietly along the sidewalks, enjoying the peaceful atmosphere of the city. Baris Arduc adjusted the sleeve of his dark coat as he stepped out onto the street. The long day behind him had been exhausting, but tonight felt different. There was something calm in the air, something that made him slow his usual pace. Across the street, standing near a small bookstore decorated with warm yellow lights, was Elçin Sangu. She wore a soft cream-colored sweater beneath a long coat, her hair moving lightly with the wind. In her hands was a small paper bag from the bookstore, and she looked around the street with a quiet smile. For a moment Baris simply stood there. Not because he was surprised to see her, but because the scene felt strangely peaceful. When Elçin noticed him, her smile widened naturally. "You're right on time," she said softly. Baris smiled back. "I almost wasn't. Istanbul traffic nearly ruined the evening." Elçin laughed quietly, the sound warm and comforting. "That would have been tragic," she replied playfully. The tension between them disappeared almost immediately. They had spoken many times before during interviews, events, and brief gatherings with friends, but tonight was different. Tonight there were no cameras nearby, no schedules waiting for them, and no loud crowds asking for photographs. It was simply two people walking together through the city. Baris looked toward the street ahead. "So where are we going?" Elçin lifted one shoulder gently. "I thought we could just walk." "Just walk?" "Yes," she said. "No plans. No pressure. Just the city and a quiet evening." Baris looked impressed. "That might be the best plan I've heard in a long time." Together, they started walking beside the water. The sounds around them were soft, distant conversations, passing boats, and the gentle movement of waves touching the shore. Streetlights reflected across the Bosphorus like golden ribbons dancing on the surface. For a while, neither of them rushed to fill the silence. And somehow the silence felt comfortable. Elçin glanced toward him. "You're quieter than usual tonight." Baris smiled slightly. "Maybe I'm trying to enjoy the moment." "That's serious?" "A little." She looked ahead, hiding a smile. There was something honest about the way they spoke tonight. No performance. No careful answers. Just simple conversations between two people slowly learning each other outside the world they usually lived in. As they continued walking, they passed a small flower stand still open near the corner of the street. Bright colors filled the tiny shop, white roses, pink tulips, and soft lavender bouquets resting beneath hanging lights. Elçin slowed down. "These are beautiful," she whispered. The older woman running the stand smiled warmly at them. "A peaceful evening deserves flowers." Baris looked at Elçin for a second before turning toward the flowers. "What's your favorite?" Elçin looked surprised by the question. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe white roses." Baris nodded thoughtfully. A few seconds later, the woman handed Elçin a small bouquet wrapped carefully in paper. Elçin blinked in surprise. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Baris replied gently. "I wanted to." For a brief second Elçin seemed speechless. Not because of the flowers, but because the moment felt sincere. "Thank you," she said quietly. They continued their walk, and the bouquet remained in Elçin's hands the entire time. Soon they reached a quieter path beside the water where fewer people passed by. Trees lined the sidewalk and small lights hung above the benches nearby. Elçin stopped near the railing and looked out toward the dark water. "I come here sometimes when life gets loud," she admitted. Baris stood beside her. "Does it help?" "A little." He nodded slowly. "I understand that." She turned toward him curiously. "You do." "There are days when everything feels too fast," he said honestly. "Work, expectations, people constantly watching you. Sometimes you forget how to breathe normally." Elçin listened carefully. It was rare to hear someone speak so openly. "You hide it well," she said softly. Baris laughed quietly. "That's part of the job." For a moment they both smiled at the truth of it. The wind became colder, and Elçin pulled her coat slightly closer around herself. Without thinking too much about it, Baris removed his scarf and held it toward her. "You'll freeze before the night ends." Elçin looked at him with surprise again. You're always this thoughtful? Only on peaceful evenings. She accepted the scarf carefully, wrapping it around her neck. Thank you. The simple moment stayed between them quietly. Nearby, an old musician softly hummed a melody to himself while organizing books beside a small table. The atmosphere felt calm and distant from the noise of the world. Baris leaned lightly against the railing. You know, I almost canceled tonight. Elcin raised an eyebrow. Really? I thought maybe we'd both be too busy. And now? He looked toward her. Now I'm glad I didn't. The answer arrived naturally, and Elcin noticed that. A soft smile appeared on her face again, smaller this time but more meaningful. They resumed walking slowly, speaking about simple things, favorite cities, quiet mornings, old memories from childhood, and dreams they rarely shared during interviews. The more they talked, the easier everything became. Hours seemed to pass without either of them noticing. At one point, they reached a small bridge glowing under the city lights. The streets around them had grown quieter now, with only a few late-night visitors still outside. Elcin looked up at the sky. It feels peaceful tonight. Baris followed her gaze. Maybe because no one's trying to rush the moment. She looked back at him slowly. And for the first time that evening, neither of them looked away immediately. The air between them changed gently. Not dramatic. Not sudden. Just soft. Emotional. Real. Then Elcin smiled again, almost shyly this time. So, she said quietly, does this count as our first date? Baris laughed softly. I was hoping you'd call it that. The two of them continued walking beneath the glowing lights of Istanbul, their footsteps matching naturally as the calm night stretched endlessly ahead of them. The night in Istanbul grew quieter as the streets slowly emptied around them. Small cafes began turning off their lights one by one, and the cool breeze from the Bosphorus carried the peaceful feeling of the evening even further. Barış Arduc and Elçin Sangu continued walking side by side beneath the glowing streetlights, their pace slow and relaxed. Neither of them seemed ready for the evening to end. Elçin still held the small bouquet of white roses carefully in her hands. You know, she said softly, looking down at the flowers, this might be the calmest evening I've had in months. Baris glanced toward her with a faint smile. That bad? Not bad, she replied. Just busy. Loud. Sometimes life moves so fast that you stop noticing simple things. And tonight? She looked around the quiet street, then toward the water shimmering beneath the city lights. Tonight feels simple. Baris nodded slowly, understanding exactly what she meant. For a few moments they walked without speaking again. But unlike awkward silence, this silence felt warm and easy between them. As they reached a small corner near the waterfront, they noticed a tiny late-night cafe still open. Golden lights glowed behind the windows, and only a few people remained inside. Elcin stopped walking. That place looks cozy. Baris looked toward the cafe entrance. Tea. She smiled immediately. Definitely tea. Together they stepped inside. The warmth of the cafe wrapped around them instantly. Soft lights reflected against wooden walls, and the smell of fresh tea filled the air. Quiet conversations floated gently from nearby tables while soft rain suddenly began tapping against the windows outside. Elcin looked toward the rain in surprise. Perfect timing. Baris pulled out a chair for her. Looks like Istanbul wants us to stay longer. She sat down, smiling softly. Maybe the city approves of first dates. Baris sat across from her, amused by the comment. A waiter soon arrived with 2 cups of warm tea. Steam rose slowly into the air between them, adding to the calm atmosphere surrounding the little cafe. For the first time that evening they truly sat still. No walking. No distractions. Just the two of them facing each other quietly. Elcin rested her hands around the warm cup. Can I ask you something honestly? You can ask me anything honestly. She hesitated for a second. Do you ever get tired of people always expecting you to be perfect? Baris looked down briefly before answering. All the time. His voice was calm but sincere. Sometimes people only see the version of us they imagine, he continued. They don't realize we have ordinary days too. Days where we're tired or confused or just quiet. Elcin listened carefully. I understand that, she admitted. There are moments when I miss being invisible. Baris smiled faintly. Invisible sounds peaceful. It does. Rain continued falling softly outside while the city lights blurred across the wet windows. The peaceful atmosphere seemed to pull more honesty from both of them. Baris leaned back slightly in his chair. What would you do if nobody recognized you for one whole day? Elcin laughed softly at the question. I'd probably spend the entire day near the sea. No phone. No schedule. Just coffee and silence. That sounds dangerously relaxing. And you? Baris thought for a moment. I'd disappear somewhere quiet. Maybe a small town where nobody cares who I am. Elcin smiled gently. You've thought about this before. More than once. Their eyes met again briefly. There was comfort in speaking with someone who understood the strange balance between public life and private emotions. The waiter passed by again, refilling their tea. Outside, the rain became heavier, but neither of them seemed bothered by it. Elcin glanced toward the window. Looks like we're trapped here now. Baris pretended to think seriously. Terrible situation. She laughed again, warmer this time. The sound made Baris smile without even realizing it. As the evening continued, their conversation drifted naturally from serious thoughts to lighter memories. Elcin spoke about childhood summers with her family, long evenings filled with laughter and homemade dinners. Baris shared stories about his early acting days and the uncertainty he once felt before success arrived. You know what's funny? Baris said quietly. What? People think confidence appears overnight. Elcin nodded immediately. But it doesn't. Not even close. She smiled softly at him. I think that's why tonight feels comfortable. Baris looked curious. Why? Because you don't pretend. The words caught him off guard for a second. Most people around him admired fame, success, or appearances. But Elcin noticed smaller things. Honest things. Baris looked down at his tea briefly before smiling. That might be the nicest thing anyone said to me in a while. The rain slowly softened outside, turning into a light drizzle again. Hours had passed, yet neither of them had checked the time. Finally, Elcin looked toward the window and sighed softly. I should probably head home soon. Baris nodded, though a small part of him clearly wished the evening could continue. Yeah, probably. But neither of them stood up immediately. The moment lingered between them quietly. Then Elcin smiled. This was nice. Baris looked directly at her. It really was. They finally left the cafe together, stepping back into the cool night air. The streets were now nearly empty, the city peaceful beneath the glow of midnight lights. Small drops of rain still rested on the sidewalks, reflecting the colors of the buildings around them. As they walked slowly again, Elcin adjusted the scarf Baris had given her earlier. I think I'm stealing this scarf permanently. Baris smiled. I was hoping you would. She laughed softly. The chemistry between them had become impossible to ignore now. Not dramatic or overwhelming, but gentle and real. When they finally reached her car waiting nearby, both of them slowed down slightly. The kind of slow that happens when nobody wants the night to end first. Elcin looked at him quietly for a moment. Thank you for tonight. Baris shook his head lightly. No. Thank you. She smiled again, softer now.